This is Afrolog. A quick message before the second part of the entire history of Congo starts. Before colonization, the Congo was not a blank slate. It was home to ancient spiritual systems, just rulers, and powerful resistant movements. In the second part, we explore what Europe tried to erase. Today, we begin with the spiritual world of the Congo people and the forgotten wars that followed.
The people of Bas-Congo developed one of Africa's most sophisticated spiritual worldviews. At the center of their belief system was the Kalunga line, a spiritual boundary between the world of the living, Ku Nseke, and the world of the dead, Ku Mpemba. They believed life was a circle, not a line. Death was not an end, but a return to the spirit world, from where ancestors could influence the living. Water, particularly the ocean, symbolized this boundary between worlds. At the heart of their cosmology was the Dikenga cross, a cosmological symbol showing the journey of life, birth, maturation, death, and rebirth. This symbol predated Christianity, but looked like the Christian cross, which later enabled Kimpa Vita to embed her theology in indigenous roots. Bas-Congo was organized around initiation societies, particularly Kimpasi for spiritual training, Lemba for economic and moral elite, Mungwangu for conflict resolution, and elder law. These groups educated youth, enforced ethical codes, and ensured social order. Christianity, when it arrived, coexisted at first, but eventually missionaries targeted these as pagan, often burning Nkisi and criminalizing Nganga practice. In the mountainous forests of eastern Congo lived the Lega people, famous for a justice system and social order centered around the Bwami society. Bwami was a moral initiation system, open to both men and women, with 7 levels of hierarchy. You did not inherit leadership, you earned it through generosity, wisdom, storytelling, artistic and symbolic knowledge. Each level came with rituals, trials, and parables passed down through carved figures and masks. Disputes were not resolved through prisons, but through public trials, storytelling, and restitution. If someone stole goats, elders might present a carved animal and ask them to interpret its meaning. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about understanding, reintegration, and moral clarity. Their system fascinated even colonial anthropologists, who often couldn't understand how a stateless people could have such refined ethics. Bwami initiates carved symbolic figures used in moral instruction. A mask of a frog might represent patience. A figure with 2 faces might represent betrayal. Every object had layers of meaning, known only to the initiated. Colonial officials confiscated many of these carvings, mislabeling them as fetishes and primitive idols. Chapter 2: Chains at the Door: How Congo Fell to Europe. They came with flags, with priests, with promises of peace, and when they left, they had rubber, gold, diamonds, and a death toll higher than the Holocaust. This is not colonization. This is the story of one man who bought a country and turned it into a slaughterhouse. King Leopold II of Belgium, frustrated with his tiny nation's lack of colonies, created the International African Association, claiming it was a humanitarian effort to end the Arab slave trade and bring Christianity to Central Africa. But behind the scenes, Leopold privately hired mercenaries, explorers, and businessmen to sign fraudulent treaties with local chiefs, most of whom couldn't read. At the Berlin Conference, 1884 to 1885, Europe carved Africa into pieces. No African was invited. Leopold walked away with a territory 76 times the size of Belgium. The Congo Free State, not a colony, but his personal property. To extract rubber, Leopold created the Force Publique, a brutal militia of white Belgian officers, African conscripts, often kidnapped, equipped with Chicot whips, guns, and chains. Villages were given impossible rubber quotas. If they failed, women were raped, Children were mutilated, and men were executed. Soldiers were ordered to cut off hands to prove bullets weren't wasted. Mutilated hands became currency of terror. Over 10 million people died between 1885 and 1908. Congo's population halved. Rubber was now liquid gold, and Congo's vines were bleeding it. Companies like Abir, supported by Leopold, used hostage-taking, starvation, and forced labor to meet quotas. Entire ethnic groups were relocated or exterminated. Reports from missionaries showed pits of severed limbs, starving laborers with lash wounds, and even ghost villages where every adult male had been killed. What was the ABIR Company? The Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company, ABIR, was formed in 1892 by a group of British and Belgian investors, with Leopold II's direct support. Their mission? Extract wild rubber from Congo's forests at zero cost. They were granted a land concession the size of Portugal. ABIR didn't hire Congolese laborers. They enforced quotas through hostage systems, taking women and children, she-coat whippings, 100 lashes for failure. Village burnings. ABIR agents lived in armed compounds with private militias. Most of them were ex-military or mercenaries. Their goal? Meet rubber quotas or face cutbacks from Leopold. To hide atrocities, ABIR began fabricating reports of cannibalism among local tribes, claiming they were civilizing savages. Missionaries, especially from Scandinavia and Britain, began documenting the crimes. Letters described starved children, mutilated fathers. Sketches and photos were smuggled out, showing baskets of hands. E.D. Morel and Roger Casement began publishing exposés. International outrage forced the Belgian government to shut ABIR down. But by then, the damage was done. ABIR proved that corporate colonialism was more brutal than national governance. It became the blueprint for later neo-colonialism, where foreign firms extracted African resources with native labor, little oversight, and massive profit margins. In the thick forests and rivers of what is now Sankuru province, a people known as the Tetela, or Mutetela, were preparing for war. They had been recruited, conscripted, and lied to by the colonial force publique. They had served Leopold II's regime. They had carried guns, and they knew exactly how the system worked. They had watched their wives taken hostage. They had watched children's hands get severed. They had delivered rubber under the barrel of European guns. But in 1895, everything broke. The Tetela were a large and decentralized Bantu-speaking people, known for their warrior culture, deep forest knowledge, spiritual resilience, and strict codes of kinship. They had long traditions of interclan justice, diplomatic councils, and spiritual guardianship through village elders. Before the colonizers came, the Tetela had a functioning societal framework based on rotating chieftainships, initiation rites into adulthood, ancestral veneration and forest cosmology, rotational agriculture, and land stewardship. They were no strangers to war, but they also knew peace. Many Tetela men had been enlisted into the force publique, believing it might offer protection and even prestige. These soldiers were armed, uniformed, and tasked with subduing their own people in service to the Congo Free State. But the betrayal came when several Tetela soldiers were accused of mutiny over minor infractions and publicly executed without trial. Specifically, Ngongo Lutete. Ngongo Lutete was born in the mid-19th century among the Songi people in the Kasai region, which lies in the south-central part of the Congo Basin. His ethnicity is often linked to both Tetela and Songi heritage, two warrior cultures known for their resistance, rituals, and fierce independence. He emerged as a military leader and regional strongman during a time of profound chaos. The area was caught between the Arab Swahili slavers coming from the east, the indigenous kingdoms collapsing from internal strife, and the rise of European colonial powers, especially the Belgians under King Leopold II. In this chaos, Ngongo built a power base and initially aligned with the Zanzibari Arab slave traders, particularly Tipu Tip and Rumaliza. These traders operated vast slave and ivory networks in eastern and central Congo. He became a high-ranking military commander in the service of Arab Swahili forces. As part of Tipu Tip's dominion, he controlled a large territory between the Lualaba and Lomami rivers. His job was to extract tribute, capture slaves, and fight rival chiefs. For years, Ngongo was a key enforcer in a brutal system. He rose through the ranks because of his strategic mind, his loyal but ruthless army, and his control over vital trade routes. He became a feared and respected figure across eastern Kasai and southern Congo. But around 1892, Ngongo's relationship with the Arab leaders soured. According to historical accounts, he was accused of disloyalty by the Arab commander Rumaliza, possibly due to jealousy or internal political rivalries. Fearing for his life, Ngongo defected to the Belgians, specifically to the forces of Francis Danis, a brutal officer of the Force Publique, who was leading the campaign known as the Congo-Arab War, 1892-1894. Ngongo offered his military experience, thousands of loyal fighters, knowledge of the terrain and Arab strategies. In exchange, he was promised protection, political recognition, and perhaps the illusion of shared power in the coming colonial administration. With Ngongo's help, Danis and the Force Publique turned the tide against the Arab Swahili forces. Ngongo and his men fought in decisive battles, captured key strongholds, and helped expel Arab leaders from regions like Kasongo and Kabambare. He was essential to Leopold's campaign to portray himself as a liberator, fighting against Arab slavers, even though Leopold's regime would later institute its own system of forced labor and atrocities. For a brief moment, Ngongo Lutete was seen as a hero by the Belgians, the African general who helped defeat the Arab menace. Despite his service, Ngongo's loyalty was always distrusted by the colonial officers. In 1895, a revolt broke out among the Tetela soldiers in the Force Publique, many of whom had formerly served under Ngongo. This was the start of what would become the Tetela Rebellion, one of the most violent anti-colonial uprisings in Leopold's Congo Free State. The Belgians, particularly Danis and other officers, feared that Ngongo might either be secretly supporting the rebels or that he might turn against them. Without trial or clear evidence, Ngongo Lutete was arrested, accused of treason, and summarily executed by firing squad in 1895. This sent shockwaves through Tetela society and sparked a rebellion. The same regime that used their labor and loyalty refused them justice. Families of the dead soldiers were dishonored. Whole clans saw the writing on the wall. If we do not fight, we die as servants. If we do fight, we die as warriors. And so the Tetela chose resistance. By 1895, entire villages began refusing rubber quotas. They ambushed patrols. They burned rubber outposts. They executed traitorous chiefs aligned with the Belgians. Using jungle warfare tactics, they struck hard and vanished into the forest. Women and elders maintained supply chains through secret routes. Children were trained as messengers. Belgium's response? Scorched earth. The Force Publique responded with brutality. Villages bombed. Entire crops burned to induce famine. Mass hostages taken, especially women and children, and mass amputations carried out as deterrent propaganda. By the early 1900s, what started as localized mutiny had become a full-scale rebellion, costing the colonial state millions. The Tetela never formally surrendered. Instead, they were fragmented by force, villages resettled, languages banned, leaders executed or exiled. But they left behind a spiritual scar that would resurface in the next generation. Journalists began collecting evidence and launched the Congo Reform Association, the first international human rights movement. Leopold panicked. He paid PR teams, built museums, donated to hospitals. But the truth was out. Shamed and pressured, Leopold sold the Congo to the Belgian state in 1908. But little changed. The system of forced labor continued, this time under government control.